Good evening, and welcome to Portland Rising, the monthly news, arts, and interview program produced by the New Portland Phoenix. Tonight, we're going to talk about the proposal, the plan to potentially profoundly change the way the city of Portland is governed. For decades, the city has had a basic council manager form of government with either a ceremonial mayor or, since a previous charter commission in 2010, a elected mayor that has somewhat limited powers. There's been a feeling among some that the appointed city manager has had too much power, and there was a feeling that drove the election for charter commission back in June 2021, and many of the people who were elected felt that there needed to be a change in Portland city government to change the relationships of power. That issue will be decided by Portland voters in November, so we're here to provide just basic information on the proposal. With me tonight are two members of the Charter Commission who have worked extremely hard for the last 11 months to develop this proposal, and it's been pretty hard work. So I want to thank them for joining me this evening. I have Marpheen Chann and Robert O'Brien. Robert, let's start with you. What is wrong with the present structure of Portland city government? Why did it need to be changed?
Sure. Well, I was on the last Charter Commission in 2009, 2010. And I guess what I've observed over the last decade or so is that what the last Charter Commission was looking for was a mayor that could be elected that could have a vision for the city of Portland. And through mostly the powers of persuasion, really push a vision that comes from the voters of Portland. We've really seen over the last decade or so, primarily because of a mix of personalities, that hasn't taken place. What I see today is that the current system as it's being carried out is that we're back to a council manager form of government without a real visionary leader that was envisioned in the last charter. And some of that is because the structures in the last charter were intentionally vague, using words like facilitate and consultation with, to advise, these words that really weren't enforceable. And as a result, they've largely gone ignored. When some actors have tried to push that, they didn't have the language in order to enforce it. And so we're right back to where we were in 2008 and 9 prior to the last reforms in the charter. Right.
Well, but is it possibly true that the charter, that the relationship between the manager and the previous mayor especially, were dictated somewhat by the personalities that were involved and a manager who accrued a great deal of power? Do you think that was maybe a unique situation, or, as you say, maybe structural in the result of the last Charter Commission, which is why it needs to be changed?
Yeah, it was somewhat unique because of the personalities, but historically, Portland in the last several decades have hired a city manager to be their visionary. And the last Charter Commission asked that we elect a visionary instead. What happened was we hired a very professionally competent city manager in John Jennings, who was also a visionary. And that was in conflict with us electing a visionary at the same time. So we had these sort of dueling forces of two visions for Portland trying to carry out their objectives in the current structure, and this led to strife.
So, Robert, describe the new proposal and how will that solve this problem?
The current proposal that's on the table right now at the time of this recording is looking to allow the elected mayor to make the executive decisions for the city of Portland. And we will still have a chief operating officer who is going to handle all the day-to-day city services, but the chief leader of the city of Portland will be the elected mayor.
One thing that has raised a question in my mind about the new proposal is the change in the number of counselors and how the counselors will work together, and I guess working through an executive committee. Marpheen, how's that going to work? That seems a little confusing for me.
Yeah, I think it may seem confusing for many folks, but I think it's something that when myself and Commissioner O'Brien were working on the initial governance compromise, that it's something that came up as a way to bridge between removing the mayor completely from the council, but also trying to keep some sort of connection to the council so that the mayor, if they're really truly going to be a policy mayor, that they have a connection to the legislative body and don't just operate in a silo. And that's why Commissioner O'Brien also proposed the idea of having the mayor develop policy in the light of day through a public task force, rather than working with lobbyists or working with people behind the scenes to come up with a fully baked proposal in private eye.
Right, so will the executive committee would be elected by the council? The council members of the executive committee, who were two,
Yes.
would be elected by the council.
Correct.
Okay. And their powers would be just helping to form those policy ideas.
Helping to form those policy ideas, also serving in the current proposal as a review committee for nominations for the constitutional officers, the on paper the COO and city clerk, and then also working with the mayor to set the council agenda and I believe proposing the council rules as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the executive committee would have, quite a bit of power in this. What about, how does it work? I mean, the basic job that gave the manager power, really, although it required council approval, was hiring and firing department heads, presumably. How would that work exactly, which is really the nub of the job in running the city? How would that work in this proposal?
That was a real big point of contention. And myself and Rob, we both agree that a mayor shouldn't have that kind of power. But in this aspect, the executive committee would take over that role as a review committee of nominating and finding department heads, presumably with the help of the COO. And then that would move on to the full council to confirm, much like the Senate, United States Senate confirms appointments and nominations. So in a way, it would kind of work like that.
Mm-hmm. So the executive committee would propose the department heads, which would then have to go to the mayor and then to the full council for approval.
Mayor and executive committee first, and then council, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. There was some issue. This, as I said, one of the basic issues in running the city is, of course, how does the police chief work? How does the fire department work? How do these departments work, which is the nuts and bolts of the city? There was some feeling with the previous city manager that councilors were annoyed and the previous mayor was annoyed that he couldn't have access to city staff. Is it proper for councilors who are basically in a policy-making role to have access to staff members, to city staff members? Is that how it should work? You can both answer this.
If you talk to me, Commissioner O'Brien and Commissioner Lizanik, we don't agree that that's not the way it should work. But we do believe that the firewall that was put up in the last Charter Commission was put up for a very good reason. There were particular councilors who would try to micromanage or try to circumvent the city manager and the ceremonial mayor at the time to pester staff into putting up parking signs or paving a road, right, or picking up trash. And I think we can fix that without doing a complete overhaul of the entire system by simply putting in place the power for the council and the mayor to create a process that is followed consistently across the board by all public policy leaders, that they can access and get information that they need to develop policy, but not to micromanage. And I
Does
think
that make sense to you, Robert?
Yeah. We've come up with a very simple solution, which is we're directing the mayor to devise a communications policy that the council will then ratify. And the communications policy are the rules by which councilors may interact with staff. And so the council is basically setting their own rules. They're all agreeing upon their own rules, and if they need to tweak them in the future, they can.
Okay.
It's a question of why is this any city manager setting the rules by which our council can interact with city staff? And so I think it's much more appropriate that the city council themselves set the rules by which they all agree to interact with city staff.
Right. Okay, very good. One really key part of your proposal going forward is a big change in that would presumably give, if approved, would give the school board more autonomy and give them control over their budget, which would still have to go out to voters for approval, but would not go to the council. Is that correct? What's the thinking behind bringing that forward?
I think the school board has felt that there hasn't been parity, there hasn't been a level footing with the council, despite state law, state statute stating that the school board has a very specific function, that this school board focuses on very specific and very narrow jurisdiction over policy, school policy. But at the same time, the state statute also says that there has to be a budget validation if the voters want to do that, and that has to go to the municipal legislative body first. The big point of contention from both sides during this is what is a definition of a municipal legislative body? Can the school board fill that role, or is the council filling that role? And so we've had competing legal opinions that fall on either side. And for me, legally, I'm on the fence about how this might turn out in court. But I think where I fall more is that home rule is such a strong precedent, has such a strong precedent in Maine, that I think the law court, the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, would actually be more in favor of school board autonomy. But again, I'm not saying that it's 100% sure.
But just to be clear for our viewers who haven't followed day by day what's in the Phoenix, what's going on here, the tentative opinion from your lawyer, Jim Katsafikis, is that the setup of giving more autonomy to the school board, he is not in favor. He would not present that as a legal opinion.
That's correct.
And the school board or others, or I think Michael Kubiti, your chair, has suggested that the attorneys for the school board, Drummond Woodsum, have a slightly different view of it. And Robert, I think you've had some cautionary words about this.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about this issue. I was on the school board from 2006 to 2009. I was on the finance committee when I was there. I believe that the concerns being raised by this school board and members and the department are legitimate. The process by which they labor so hard for many months putting a budget together and then go to a fresh council who's largely never looked at the budget, who then arbitrarily draw a line in the sand and have massive implications on education in Portland is fraught with issues. I absolutely legitimize the issue at hand. Right. The problem is, if we're getting back to the legalities of it, the state law says, as Commissioner Chann has pointed out, that's a three-part system. School board sets the budget. A municipal legislative body sets the total sum that they're allowed to have, and then it goes out to voters. And there are some differing views, but I feel very strongly that the school board is not a municipal legislative body. They're not a department of the city. They are an agency of the state. They're sort of a local chapter of the State Board of Education. And so they can't serve as a city's legislative body. And there's a question between a governing body, which sets policies, which is a board of overseers, and that's really what the school board is, versus a legislative body that can enact laws. The school board cannot enact laws. It's not a legislative body. And so for that reason, it's neither part of the municipality, it's not part of the city hall, and it's not a legislative body. I believe legally it does not have the right to serve that second ratifying function that's in the state law.
And there certainly would be a legal debate if it is put forward.
Or a legal lawsuit. I mean, it's very likely, a lot of people agree that we're likely to be sued. We could be sued by the state, who may want to challenge us trying to set a precedent. We could be sued by private parties. And Commissioner Chann is correct. There's a strong precedent of home rule. A judge could just vaguely rule that home rule prevails because it's one of our core legal beliefs in the state. But it could cost the city of Portland hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend this. And so I think it's a highly risky proposition to put forward.
Yeah, I think that is a concern. And it was striking to me that which I mentioned earlier in the pages of the Phoenix, that the commission took a fairly wide purview and in taking on issues of the school board and beyond the initial issue of the mayor's powers and the relationships at City Hall. And do you think that will maybe deter getting the whole package passed?
Again, it's up to the voters.
Right.
The voters get to do the final ratification.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the voters are willing to take that risk, I think, very few things are without risk. But I think education is baked into the charter. It's the second paragraph of our preamble, and pages of it are dedicated to school board functions. And so I think voters of the city who will look at this will have to determine, does education rise to this level of autonomy that we want for the school board? And I think that's ultimately, our role isn't to put a stamp on things, and that's the way things are. Our role is to basically recommend to the council and to the voters, here are our thoughts and ideas. Mm-hmm. Now you
and I guess if I understand correctly, it's possible that the parts could be divided
Exactly.
and put out to voters.
The Charter Commission has the purview to separate questions on the ballot, and
Right.
we haven't had this discussion yet, but it's likely that the Charter Commission will choose to isolate that question.
Right.
It's my hope that we divide all the questions.
Right.
I don't think it's fair to the voters to put it all in one omnibus package. Yeah.
What do you expect from the process going forward? There's going to be public campaigns. You're going to be meeting? I think you have 4 meetings left. Mm-hmm. Will there be debate about the continuing things that are slightly unresolved? I know, Marpheen, you voted against the proposal that has gone forward, but there may be an amendment that would get your support to that. Can you explain how that might happen? Or
I think there's still time, and I'm very grateful for Commissioner O'Brien for being the open ear that to talk to throughout this entire process, because you picked the right 2 people to talk about this, we've dug into
no doubt of that.
To flatter ourselves.
You were selected carefully.
The original governance compromise proposal, this amendment is actually almost basically a carbon copy of that, and just putting it in the context of this new governance proposal. Me and Commissioner O'Brien both agree the mayor should have more power over the budget, more power over performance reviews of the city manager, which would make the city manager more accountable to the public, and reducing the firewall between council communication with staff. And I'm forgetting one more thing.
Set policy, to be able to devise policy.
Yeah.
So those are things that, if they were, those are things that you like in the proposal, or would have to, that could be changed, and it will go forward with your support.
With my support, but I'm also worried about the perception of the Charter Commission. It's not just my thoughts and my beliefs that I think should be voted on. It's how can we achieve the broader consensus among the Charter Commission? Not just a 7-5. We need to aim for at least 8-4 or 9-3. And if there's a miracle, 12-0. I think that would send a message to voters that this constitutional convention, this charter convention, if you can call it that, actually has broad consensus on this package of ideas that we're pitching to the voters. So that's something I'm also worried about, is how do we build broader consensus among the Charter Commission, which is a microcosm of the voters of the city of Portland as a whole.
Right. So will commissioners be, campaigning or working in this kind of public forum to talk about these events? I would like to do that again in the fall, maybe, when maybe people are more focused on it.
I think it's yet to be seen. As Commissioner Chann alluded to, there's still some conversation to be had. We did send a concept to the city council, as we were required to do, But there's still a lot of nuances to be resolved in the next 2 months. And I think it depends on how commissioners are feeling once we pass the final resolution that will go to voters. There will absolutely be advocates in the city, and I can't tell you who they are, but we know they're going to arise to campaign on either side of whatever gets proposed.
Right.
And it depends on how passionate individual commissioners are about the final package that comes out.
Right.
There are lots of folks on the fence right now. You know, they passed what went to the city council for various reasons, but that doesn't mean that they're not open to tweaks and changes or even movement in the final proposal.
Right. It's been a challenging process, and with some divisions, of course, which could be expected among the commission. And one thing that has occurred, 15 former mayors in the city have come out against it, and I would assume they'll be campaigning against it. That's obviously they've already started. How do you respond to their concerns that they've articulated about it?
I think they're opposed to the drastic changes of creating basically an authoritarian mayor. Is what they're afraid of, and a mayor that can just go down to the parking person and say, hey, I'm going to fire you unless you fix this parking debacle with my associate. And things that, corruption that we've seen in other cities like Bridgeport, Connecticut, or in New York City. I think that's what they're afraid of, and that concern has valid points. But in that press conference, in the letter, they were open to some of the changes. The 4 pillars that I threw out there was more power over the budget for the mayor, the performance review of the city manager, incremental changes that might seem small but will have a big effect on how accountable, how transparent, and how fair city government is.
So I hadn't realized they were open to some of them. And one thing that would seem so the in
It was
this
a very small line, but I picked up on it.
in the what would happen then under your proposal that they are open to is that the mayor is singly responsible for the review of the chief operating officer rather than the council as a whole. Is that not correct?
It's not correct. That's part of my contention with what was released is that it was the press release came out before our final proposal was even voted on. There's no way for this group of folks to actually know the final contents of what was in it. There were some broad sweeping terms of an all-powerful mayor and some other verbiage that just does not accurately characterize what's finally being voted on. It would have been much more productive for us to have conversations of like, what are the most critical issues that we could shore up before advancing this?
Do you think that kind of dialogue might happen? That would you reach out to them, or would they reach out to you? I mean, it sounds like maybe there are areas of compromise.
They've been reaching out.
Pardon?
They've been reaching out as well as many people in the city on both sides of the issue, or in the center, or left of center, or right of center. And
So you're hearing from a lot of people.
From a lot of people. It's not just the folks that show up on Zoom public hearings that have opinions. And I think there's this connotation about people that show up at public hearings as if their voice matters more than the people who send emails or write letters. No, any person in the city who speaks out, their opinion really matters and should be taken and have equal weight. And so the former mayors have been reaching out, and we get our inboxes filled. Commissioner O'Brien has done something that I really appreciate is when you send him an email, he sends you a response, automatic
Says
response.
you've been heard.
That you've been heard. Little things like that make people feel like their opinion matters. And for me, I might not always have time to answer an email, but I for darn sure read those emails. And sometimes I have to ignore my fellow commissioners' emails to weed out those things, but I think it's
I'm
important.
really curious how this process of discussion and review of these proposals is going to go forward, because it's not uncomplicated.
Yeah.
And voters will have to pay attention and really think about how the proposed changes would play out. And that's really, that's going to be interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Just quickly, we're close to the end of our time. I wonder what it's been like for you to work together on the commission. I know it's been tough at some moments. Some people have disliked the process, but is all told, since most of it is said and done now, do you feel okay about having been part of this? And I'm wondering what it feels like, if you're happy.
It's been a joy working with Commissioner O'Brien. Like, him and I talk on the phone, and it's good civic dialogue. We exchange ideas. And I think it was because we respect each other, and that's where a lot of this needs to start from. Mm-hmm. We come at this from different perspectives. Overall, the process I've enjoyed. My training is in political science and in law, but the part that I was dismayed by in your paper was the straw poll process for the governance vote, which I thought forced people into a black and white decision making, which is not.
It certainly lengthened the process.
Yeah.
It really did. Any final thoughts from either of you going forward as to how this is going to play out, what you hope will happen? Robert?
We're in the final hours of this. I would love for us, as Commissioner Chann alluded to earlier, that for us to put a final proposal that garners the vast majority of commissioners get behind, that we can all be proud of, that we can really sell out there. Mm-hmm. I do think there's some unresolved issues right now that are keeping us up at night. And I hope that we can land this plane and bring in something that really makes Portland proud.
Excellent.
I would say the same thing. Broad consensus is the most important thing for the Charter Commission, both how we're perceived, but also the feeling that we should give city voters that they're voting on something that a vast majority of us agree on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for being with us tonight. This has been a great discussion. I congratulate you for taking this on and working so hard on this commission. It's really been yeoman service to the city of Portland. So you've really worked hard, and I thank you for coming on to explain these issues. And as I said before, it is the voters of Portland who are going to decide this in November. And so I hope that viewers and voters will be really paying attention to the discussion that goes on in the next few months, because these are important changes that are proposed. Again, I want to thank our guests and our friends at the Portland Media Center for helping us put on this program. And please join us next month in June for another edition of Portland Rising.